So one of the things I've become more aware of over some years now is just mental health in general. Picking one part of it, we could talk about PTSD as it relates to the war, PTSD as it relates to trauma outside of the war, and all the things that kind of interconnect it and bring it all together, right? So one of the things I want to talk about is how we have started to romanticize, and I think we've kind of touched on this before. We've romanticized mental health in
Yeah,
especially in the United States, but around the world to begin with. And I'm not talking about like all the trans and LGBTQ stuff. Like
right.
that's not something I'm going to touch on today. What I do want to talk about is how you're starting to see a huge uptick in people that have anxiety or bipolar disorder or
Right.
borderline personality disorder and all this stuff. And we in the West
Yeah,
are a very medication
yeah,
heavy society. So we see a lot of these doctors, instead of treating the symptoms, or actually not treating the symptoms, but treating the issues, with therapy and with broadening our arsenal against this. We just medicate people, and a lot of times we medicate them wrong because what we think is bipolar disorder or depression is just trauma from something that's happened. It's a trauma response. And what I've actually learned a lot more recently is that when you have trauma like that, when you have something in your past that you were never taught to cope with, or you never had the ability to cope with, then it can turn into you have yes,
yeah,
yes, it's live right now. um it turns into things that look like other
yeah.
mental disorders or mental illnesses. Someone with PTSD from something
Right.
that happened in their childhood can exhibit signs and symptoms of manic depressive, bipolar disorders,
Right.
all of them, 1, 2, 3, 10, however many they have, borderline personality disorder. And so now they're being medicated and treated for these things, but the underlying issue
Right.
isn't being addressed. On top of that, with the romanticization, I think that's how you say it, of these mental disorders and stuff like that, it's become almost
Yeah.
cool and sexy to have something
Yeah.
wrong, be bipolar or be depressed or having, I don't think I haven't met anybody, in recent times that
Right.
doesn't have anxiety, and the problem I see with that is that the people who actually suffer, to varying degrees with anxiety and depression and trauma and PTSD, you know, they tend to not be as vocal about it because there's so many people. You sit down. I was in the first responder community for a long time, and they talk about, it's like having anxiety is just like a part of, like, you just get issued it once you sign up, and you become, and you
Right.
start running the streets as a
Right.
paramedic or a cop or a firefighter, and stuff like that. So I tend to wonder if we're not really actually seeing more people with mental disorders or mental illnesses, or even trauma and PTSD. What we're seeing people mimic the signs and symptoms because it's become almost a part of our society to be anxious, to have anxiety
Yeah.
and stuff like
Yeah.
that.
We're both. Yeah.
Yes, we're gonna post we're gonna post it up to our YouTube channel,
So
and we'll post a link
yeah, for sure.
to everybody
So
as
check this
well.
out. So what you were saying, man, and I agree with you. I think that, so first and foremost, for the people who are dealing with real depression, who are dealing with real anxiety, dealing with all these issues, who have these challenges, these mental health challenges in real life, I think sometimes they almost get sold short because everybody's out here trying to be and accept these ideas. You see what I'm saying? I think everybody is jumping on these trains, and
Yeah,
so then all of the real help that's out there is almost being taken up because you got everybody jumping out here saying that. I mean,
yeah,
it's interesting because, like I said, working with teenagers and working with youth, I think we have developed a society where emotional regulation no longer exists. So you're either completely and totally controlled by your emotions, and having ups and downs and emotional shifts or mood swings. It's been translated that that means something's wrong with you, and it's not just being human. It's not just being part of life. You know what I mean? Because you're gonna have days where you just are sad. Like like you're gonna have days where you're not always on 10 all the time. And the reality is that that's part of the human experience. We are imperfect beings. We are flawed. We're gonna have, days where we're tired. I mean, here's that. So that's a big one. Another reason why a lot of these mental health issues are on the rise is because health is on the decline. Physical health physical health to play a big
True.
role in the mental health world. I mean, you figure they've already proven that. I think they said something like, and I can speak from a teenager perspective, it's something like 85% of teenage like depression and anxiety, you know, specifically depression, is linked more to an unhealthy lifestyle than it is to actually having some type of
Yeah.
trauma that is causing these feelings. And it's more of a chemical imbalance because you're sedentary,
Yeah.
you're not active. You're not going outside. Think about it. All these kids do is sit on the cell phones or they're on the game. They're sitting in the house. You know, I couldn't tell you how many times I go to a classroom and I say, yo, how many of y'all go outside? And they all look at me like, what? I ain't going outside. You know, like they're addicted, they're allergic to outside now. And so I think sunshine and getting proper eating habits and diet and nutrition. I mean, you figure half of the people in the world nowadays, you think about it,
Hmm.
obesity's on the rise, you think about heart disease on the rise, all of these different physical issues are on the rise because of the
Yeah.
food we eat. I mean, we don't do nothing but snack. Yeah, go ahead.
So I want to come back. I want to come back to food because I just actually today was sent something by somebody to kind of just see a couple of things going on in the world with food. So I definitely want to come back,
Okay.
and I think that's going to be its
Yeah.
own little section in a few minutes. Um, but one of the main things I wanted to say about mental health is I think that a lot of this is starting, and the reason you're seeing it in the generations coming up behind us more prevalently, as in they're just more vocal about it, and everyone says that they have it. I'm not saying
Right.
that none of them have it. I'm just saying that a lot of them think that they have it, and the ones that really do have it, they're not being taught how to cope with
Yeah.
stress at a younger age. So they don't have anybody to be there when they're sad, when they're young, to be like, hey, it's okay to be sad. So that goes untreated for so many years. So they
Right.
equate being sad with just being depressed. You know, my grandmother died 5 years ago, right? It
Right.
makes me sad. I still get sad about it because I love my grandma. Now, does it cripple me to where I can't get out of bed? No. That's how I know that I'm not depressed. I'm just sad about it. It comes in waves. People who suffer with depression, you know, real depression doesn't look like people that are like, oh, I'm depressed. It's people who don't take a shower for a week. You know, people who, you know, who used to eat really healthy
Right.
don't eat at all. They're just not eating. They're eating
Yeah.
one or two meals and they're unhealthy, and they're,
You
just like we talked about,
you'll
your
see
health,
like
once your health is
yeah,
declining,
you'll see
your
like you
mind is declining,
certainly lose passion
you
for
know.
things that you normally were passionate about. You know, it's so funny because depression is a sneaky thing, right? So ironically, you know, so you know, in the ancient texts and like in biblical and stuff like that, you know, they refer to depression as a spirit of heaviness, and I think that's an interesting concept. It's a spirit of
Yeah.
heaviness. It's where it's a weight on you. It's not even necessarily a sadness. It's more of a it's depression. You're being pressed. It's just like I just feel heavy and I don't want to do this. You get lethargic. Like there's a lot of different ways that depression can manifest itself. You know, and I think that's where it's such a slippery
Hmm.
slope why people are thinking this is depression and thinking this is depression and thinking this is depression. And the truth is there's so many different aspects of how depression can present itself that I think sometimes you either think you're depressed when you're not, or you might be depressed and don't know it.
That's very, that's yeah, that's basically it. That's the truth right there, man. And I think
Right.
I think it's going to get worse because, you know, like I said, I think these younger kids are not being taught how to cope with their feelings and their emotions. Now, whether it's fear, anger, you know, and if they have like a little bit of, because you could be anxious about things without
Yeah,
having anxiety.
absolutely.
Okay, disassociation is another good one. And so what we're seeing now is we're seeing these kids are turning to online because you have a lot of resources online, a lot of videos and stuff like that. So I'm going to give my typical warning when I talk about online resources is all these things that you see, even our channel technically, you know, everything on YouTube, everything on the internet, every little motivational video, every relationship video, every mental health video, you've got to be careful because if you're in a certain state of mind, let's say you're sad and you're looking for things about sadness, you're going to get bombarded with that online, and that can continue to make you sad or make you
Right.
believe that
Oh,
you're
man,
sadder
good
than you
point.
are. It's kind of like drawing tarot cards. If you make videos generalized enough, it's going to snag on
Mhm.
almost every person in one way, shape, or form. And so what I advise is like, if you see a 10-minute clip, there's probably more to the story than that. Watch
Right.
the whole thing. Get the entire view from the good and the bad. Because if you make your mind up over a 5-minute video,
Right.
you're not doing very well. You know, you have the potential to go down the wrong road and, you know, hurt
Right.
yourself or hurt other people, you know, emotionally and stuff like that. So I tell everybody to be very careful. I have seen some really good stuff on there. I think watching, especially, you know, known people who are super intelligent. Like, I'm a huge fan of Jordan Peterson. Sometimes he gets a little conservative for my personal taste, but he's an extremely intelligent person. The way he talks about a lot of mental health issues and feelings and just psychological stuff. But I always, even with his videos, watch his whole
Right.
video. Don't watch a 5-minute clip, because he says a lot
Right.
and he speaks very eloquently. He makes very good points, and he
Right.
will talk to you from different directions.
Right.
So don't just watch 5 minutes of somebody talking. Watch the whole thing. Don't just watch
Well,
five
wait,
minutes of our show. Watch the whole thing.
so
Right?
if you think about it, though, I mean, but that's we live in the microwave generation. We live in the soundbite generation. We live our whole life based off of sound bites. And if you
Yeah.
translate that thought process, where we take a little bit and we run with it, that's the same thing that happens with our emotions. I mean, think about it. You have one little emotion, and for that moment, and in that moment, you run with it and you dive into the deepest, darkest parts of that feeling. You know what I mean? Like I deal with, like, you know, you deal with the kids and like regulating. You made a good point about coping mechanisms, right? About learning how to cope with stress early on. I think what happens is that, oh, I lost you. Let me see. It looks like I lost you for a minute. Oh, we lost him. No, technology. Okay,
No, I'm
okay.
coming
Oh, there
back.
you go. Okay, yeah,
I'm
yeah,
coming
yeah.
back. I'm coming back.
So
I'm
what
coming
I
back.
was saying was that that
Sorry.
same mindset of like living life in sound bites, right? And then that becomes truth, right? That becomes the whole foundation of your life. That one little clip or two little clips that you watch. Well, the same thing I think applies to our emotions. I think many
Yeah.
times we take one emotion that we experience at this one particular moment and we apply it like a blanket over all of everything that we do and everything that we are. It becomes the very way that we process information. Like, you have one little moment of like anger, or and just like that, you had that moment of anger, and now you think, I'm an angry person. You see what I'm saying? I think a lot of times we identify. Did you catch that last part? Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I
It's
was answering a
all
text from
good.
my mom.
I
Yeah.
was saying, I
Yeah.
think a lot of times what adds to the
Yeah.
mental health growth in society is we identify with these feelings instead of just experience them. You know what I mean? Like we identify with this
Hmm.
little moment of anger. All of a sudden, it becomes who I am. I'm an angry person. You know, maybe I've got anger issues. I've got anger
Yeah.
management. You know, all that kind of stuff. You know, or I had one moment where I was a little bit sad that day. Now I'm a sad person. And like you said, you search the internet for a lot of sad, you know, videos and clips. So you remember the algorithms, they read you and they know when you're happy. They know when you're sad. They know when you're angry. They know when you're looking at your ex-girlfriend's profile that you ain't supposed to be looking at. You know, they know when you're doing that. And so what do? And they filter you more information to keep you thinking and feeling that way. And it's just like with a confirmation bias where, you know, you hear something that, you know, kind of goes along with what you're thinking, and then there it is. Of course it makes sense. You know, and so I think that a lot of
Yeah.
times, because we identify with how we feel instead of just feeling what we're feeling, then it becomes an ingrained part of our soul, and it filters how it's the way, and we through those feelings was how we filter information. And so when someone gives you truth, like my mother used
Yeah.
to always tell me this, man, I think I mentioned it before. She used to always tell me, listen, emotions are clouds of judgment, and frustration will make you lose
Yep.
focus. And I think a lot of times when we're
Yep.
talking about mental health is on the rise, it's because we don't know how to deal with our emotions. Because when they say emotions are good servants and terrible masters. And so what happens is now you got these emotions
Hmm.
that are literally filtering and blinding you, so you can't see the truth that's right in front of you. You might think, oh, I'm not good enough, or,
Yeah.
you know, I'm not worthy, or you feel rejected. But the truth is you're being blinded by those feelings, not realizing that you have a group of people around you who love you, who support you, who are with you, who are by your side. But you
Yeah.
won't see that because
Yeah.
we've identified with these feelings instead of just experiencing them. So
Yeah. No. That's a big part of it too. Is the people you
yeah,
surround yourself with. Um, I have someone who's very special to me that is dealing with a lot
right.
of issues from past trauma. I don't think she's watching the show, but she wanted to be here, but she had to go do something with her kid. But I will say this: I've watched her struggle for years, and she, you know, as far she always thinks of herself as less because she hasn't succeeded yet. She doesn't feel like she's better. She hasn't gotten off of her medication. She has
Right.
she continues to get up on that horse and she tries really hard. Now I've watched her try some really positive avenues, and I've watched her try some other avenues that were not, I would have told you at the beginning that they weren't going to be positive, and you weren't going to have a positive outcome from it, but I think she's finally on the right road. And so she is she's honestly the reason why I wanted to talk about mental health today, because I think that there's people out there that don't feel like anybody cares. And we can vouch for that in the veteran community. It's only in recent years that we started actually accepting that it's okay not to be okay, because our culture, especially at the beginning of the war, was very toxic. I remember right before we hit Iraq the first time in 2006, our public affairs officer came in, and the first thing he says, you don't fucking cry on camera. He says, you're United States Marines. He says, I don't care if your friend is lying dead right behind you, or you just saw 4 of your friends get blown into pieces. You don't cry on camera. America's watching you, and you don't cry on camera. And I carried that with me for a long time. I mean, I've never cried on camera, but you're taught from an early stage in the military to just take your emotions and put them inside, and you put it for later. And honestly, sometimes you have to. Like, if you're in the heat of battle, you can't stop it. You can't stop and cry and feel bad.
Yeah.
But then all that stuff comes back hard, later on. And I was honestly like, I denied that there was anything wrong with me for a long time, and it definitely led me to make some really terrible decisions in my life. And I did some things that I'm really not. I'm shameful for. I think shame is the only word that really covers how I feel about that. Now, if the person I am today could talk to that person back then, I'd probably beat his ass, because he just wasn't the man that he should be. And it took me a long time. It took me talking to psychiatrists, and it took me to talking to counselors, and honestly talking to other vets is what really helped me get to a point where you're never better. Okay, you do get better. You're never cured. It's learning how to cope in a positive way, which means if you're getting drunk every night to kill the demons, that's not positive. All right, if you're obese and you're starving yourself to get thinner, that's not positive. It's finding healthy coping mechanisms to get you to a place where you can deal with those stresses and those traumas. What do we got down here? Trauma focused therapist here. Not only is mental health romanticized, the words trauma, depression, anxiety, etc. are as well. Sometimes, especially with teens, it's important for them to be educated, and they need to know that sadness, anger, and overall emotions are normal. No, you're absolutely right. That's exactly.
And so
exactly what,
so speaking of your point, what I mean, I know you were saying that for a lot of times, military culture, I agree with you, is not conducive to like mental health. Let's be real about it. It's not conducive to mental health. Because guess what? In reality, you are government property. You're a weapon. That's what you are. And weapons have no feelings. So in the grand scheme of it, just like physical pain, emotional pain is the same. Or they tell you pain is weakness leaving the body. Pain is discipline. So you deal with all these ailments and aches and breaks, and you never want to go to medical. You never want to do none of that because you don't want to be taken out to fight. You don't want to be, out the opera, light duty. You know what I'm saying? They would, put you in the light duty platoon or whatever. And so you don't want to be in that situation. And so now you get out of the military, and think about it, how many veterans walking around with knees and feet and back and necks and shoulders, and nothing works, and you can't even hardly walk. Well, the same thing goes with your mind. The same thing goes with your soul, because you experience these traumas, these pains, these hurts in your mind, but you've been conditioned to just press them down, deal with it, be all right, deal with it. Then when you finally get out of the heat of battle, or you finally get out of that uniform and then you walk away from it, now everything comes flooding and rushing back at once, and you don't know how to deal with it. And the reality is the resources available up until recently were not adequate. You know what I mean? And that's just not even close.
No.
You know what I mean? You figure what? You come back and they give you a PDHA doggone packet, you fill out, you know what I'm saying? Telling you, hey, do you ever feel angry? Sure. You know what I mean? Do you ever feel hurting someone? Yeah. Yeah.
Did you ever feel like
Keep
hurting
asking me these
someone
questions. Yes,
right
I'm
after?
getting angry and I feel like
Yeah,
hurting. You know what I mean? Like,
I remember.
you know, and
Did
like,
you see any dead bodies or
sure.
like
I
you?
mean, what are we
Yeah,
talking about? Okay, good. Stamp, bill of health. You know what I mean? It's like, you know, so it's
yeah. It was very. It was a checklist they had to go through. But I mean, you can take that and you can apply that to as inadequate as our services were while we were at war, when we came home from war. You know, in the actual scope of medicine out there, there's just not a lot of focus on getting people better, getting people to cope better. It's, oh,
right,
you have depression? I got a pill
right.
for that. You're angry? I got a pill for that. Oh, you're sad? You're anxious? You're whatever? We have a pill for that.
Yeah,
I think you have this, so I'm just
yeah.
going to give you this medicine and see if it
We'll
works.
give
And
you
if it
another
doesn't,
one.
come back and we'll try a new medicine. And when you're a lot younger, and
Mhm.
you get caught in this cycle of, well, I'm just going to
Right,
medicate,
right,
to
right.
not be sad or not be depressed or not be anxious, and then 10, 15 years down the road,
Yeah, you've
guess
been at
what?
it.
Now you can't
Right,
stop taking your
right,
medicines because it'll
right,
kill you, because you'll die. You're addicted to them.
right.
You're not addicted to them in an addict type
You're
way, but now
dependent. So
you're so
dependency,
dependent
that's
on
that
them.
you're dependent on it. Now your body needs it to even function properly.
Because I because I know, believe me, like there's a huge difference between an addict and someone who is now dependent on a medication. And when I say dependent, I mean after 6 to 8 hours,
Right,
they're going through withdrawals. And once they start going through withdrawals,
right,
all that
right,
anxiousness comes back. Everything comes back because now they're in this cycle and they can't break it, and they won't be able to break that cycle until they go and see the person that can help them. And finding that
right,
person that can finally make that breakthrough, and like, hey, I know that all these other doctors have told you this is what's wrong with you, but I think it's this, and make you actually, you
right,
have to do the work on your own as well, because the doctors can't go home with you, and I know for a lot of these therapies, there's stuff you're
right,
supposed to do outside of the session,
right, right.
whether it's journaling or mental
Hmm.
exercises, breathing exercises, and stuff like that. Um, so you have to be really acute, and you have to be really on top of that, because if you want to get better, you're going to get better. But no one can get you better. No one can, and I learned this the hard way. You can't do some of these things for these. There's no matter what you do to try to take away stress or make things easier. That person, there are certain things that they have to do on their
Right,
own. All right. And as men, we know this. As men, we are fixers, we are protectors, we are providers. And every ounce of you, especially if it's someone you care about, every ounce of
right,
you wants to do it for them. You want to shoulder that you want to shoulder that for them. And then you get to a point where you have to step back, and once you can realize that that person has to do it on their own, then you turn from a, do everything for them
right.
role, and you fall into a support
Yeah,
role,
and I think,
you know,
my bad, I mean
and you
to
check on
cut
them,
you off. But no, I mean,
no,
you're right. I mean, I
go
think
ahead.
that, and so I just saw a comment down here, medication provides what is referred to as a window of opportunity for therapeutic interventions. Yeah, essentially, the reality is like, here's the thing. It's not that all medicine is bad, right? It's not that all medicine is bad by any
No,
means, because what it does essentially, when done properly and administered properly, it levels the ship so that we can repair it. You see what I'm saying? So that we can go through the process of
yeah,
repairing the pieces and the rudder and all that stuff that's got it off balance. You know what I'm saying? But what happens is that a lot of doctors, and it's not all, but a lot of in Western medicine specifically, in the pharmaceutical companies and all, it's profitable. I mean, let's be real with it. You know what I mean? Let's be honest. A lot of these medicines, and like I said, I'm not a doctor or medical official, so I don't know how the whole process works. But what I will say is that we do know that, I mean, Big Pharma had like a $4 billion profit last year. You know what I mean? And a lot of that comes from the the purpose of our medical system. Ideally, is supposed to be trying to get people healthy, but in many aspects, all we're doing is sedating people. You know what I mean? All we're in many aspects, I mean, especially in the kids. I mean, with kids, a lot of these kids, the reason they act out is not because they have ADHD or they crazy, or like they have a condition called I had a kid I dealt with who, he didn't want to act right, and they said he had what's it called? It's something defiant disorder, where basically where he I forget what it's
okay,
called, but basically they were saying he had a mental health condition where he defied authority, where he don't like authority, and I'm like,
yeah,
Oh, okay. I mean, I'm not saying, like I said, I'm not a medical professional, and I'm not saying that maybe there isn't some type of chemical imbalance that exists. However, I personally believe, because I know the kid from the beginning, he was spoiled since he was a child, and was his mother, basically the father was abusive. So there you have it. That's the first trauma. Father was abusive. Mother put the father out, and she had the baby late. And so what happened was that she raised him
Hmm.
trying to make up for the father, sins of the father, and then turned around and spoiled him and just gave him everything he wanted, anything he wanted. And I'm gonna tell you right now, and you just said it, Majestic. I was saying I think the real condition is NAW. A lot of these kids deal with what's called needs a whooping. You know what I'm saying? And I'm not saying you need to, like, go around beat your kids, or I'm not saying that spanking the kids is always the best option. But what I'm saying is that when you have a child that is raised, like this kid in particular, he was raised from a child that he could have anything he wanted. And if he didn't get it, he could just throw a fit and get it. And now those kids that do that,
Yeah.
when you do not get a hold on that, teach them authority, when you don't take the time to actually get to know what makes them tick in order to be able to approach the issue, then what happens is they turn into
Hmm.
grown monsters. And then now you have a
Yeah.
kid. Now remember, now you have a kid when his mother told him, I remember I heard they told me about it, he got put out because when his mother told him that he couldn't go to some school or something, he started throwing stuff through the wall. You know what I mean? He starts throwing vacuums everywhere. You know what I mean? He starts punching walls and going crazy. He got kicked off of a couple basketball teams because he couldn't get the jersey number he wanted. You know what I mean? He starts fighting people. You know what I mean? So this is where we have to deal with this at a young age. You know what I'm saying? And and think about it, and it already starts with you got the abusive father. So then now you've already planted that seed of violence. So now you add into that and it grows and he
Yeah.
resents the mother because he feels like she put the father out and took his father out of his life. So there's so many different layers that we have to deal with. Yeah.
Well, that's why that that's why psychology and mental health in children is important, but not so much like,
Right.
diagnosing them and medicating them, but understanding that things that happen in your childhood are they're a lot tougher to deal with than when you're an adult. So I had this conversation recently. Someone who had something happen to them in their past, in their childhood, right? It still affects them till today. And talking, you think I was like, for a long time, like the hardest thing I've ever done in my life was the war, right? So the war really affected me. But I was not a 11-year-old child. I
Right.
was a 19-year-old young adult. So my emotional capacity to process what is happening to me was much, much higher. I was also trained to go to war, to a certain extent. Let's see, what we got? Aneurysm makes me sick. They put a label on behavior, calling it an illness, and here there's a med for that. Then comes the victim mentality. I act like this because the doctor says. So
Yeah.
now there's thin
Yeah.
lines that parents walk on.
I
No,
deal with that all the
a
time.
hundred percent. And when you're a child and something happens to you and you don't have someone in your life to teach you, you don't know how to process it. Someone has to teach you how to process, how to cope, and how to conduct yourself after something happens. So if you have a mother or a father that's abusive your entire life, you grow up a certain way. You grow up expecting to be punished for your smallest mistakes. If you have parents that are absent and don't do anything with you, well, you don't really know what to do when you feel things because there's nobody there
Right.
to teach you how to do it. You know, Also, if your parents are the one, and it doesn't necessarily have to be physical abuse, but
Yeah.
parents can mentally and
Yeah.
emotionally abuse their children as well. And you can turn them into monsters, or you can turn them into people that hurt other people, or you can turn them into people that just
Mhm.
they're not productive in their lives. They don't know how to take care of themselves, when it comes to matters inside, inside their minds and inside their hearts, because no one was there to nurture and teach them that, and by the time they realize that, by the time, you get to a point where you are self-aware, you're looking back over, years of damage and years of neglect. And most of that neglect
Yeah.
is you neglecting yourself, so it's really important. I think as a society, we need to get away from just throwing pills, just like Aneurysm said, you know, people become what they've been diagnosed with. I do this because I take this medicine because I have this
Right.
illness that my doctor told me I had. never ever going any deeper than that. And so now they've given themselves an excuse
Yeah.
for terrible behavior, that hurts themselves, that hurts the people
Right.
around them, that hurts the people they care about them and stuff like that. So it's a fine line. But there's also a difference between the people who live with their mental illness or what they've been told is a mental illness, and there's also the people that are clawing their way out of it, trying to better themselves on a day-by-day basis. When I was trying to become a better man, you have to sit there and have some really difficult conversations, first of all, with yourself. And you have to admit to things. It was so easy, or it would have been so easy, to blame my shitty behavior in my past on, I have PTSD from the war, and that's it. And people with PTSD, we can, I have nightmares, and I have this and I have that. And it's such a cop out. It's a cop out at a certain point.